Yeah, thanks, Adam. Thanks for having me on and giving me the opportunity to talk here. And thanks to everybody for getting on in the middle of the week and an afternoon. Hopefully, I can make it worth your while. So, like Adam said, I'm at Michigan State, going on my fourth season. I absolutely love my role. I'm only responsible for our 26 guys, and it really allows me to go deep and put everything I have into the group and to the individual. So, um, excited to share, and hopefully you guys can get something out of it. But before I start, I want to give a good thanks. You know, in the bottom right there, first and foremost, to my wife Jackie and our now 8-month-old daughter Charlotte. Working at in sports is inherently selfish. Our hours, our travel, the time, and the energy out. Can come at the expense of being home, and to have a partner who's not just there, but really supporting you. I'm beyond grateful to have her. And then on the left, really everything I'm going to touch on is just a composite of ideas and inspiration from time spent and conversations with these people. So, first there, Ben, I've been lucky to spend some time with him the last year, and I'm sure most people know him. An overwhelmingly smart guy, a leader in our field, and someone who I feel is doing things that few are. Matt Price, a big name in the 1080 community, definitely in the sport of hockey, pushing the envelope there for sure. With this technology, but speed and the idea of doing speed on the ice in our sport. Altus, mentorship and time with those guys really developed my thought process. Look at not only the what, but the why behind things. GVN USA Hockey, my previous employer, lucky to have spent time there and a network now of strength coaches that I can bounce ideas off of, very, very forward thinking and, approach things from a similar way. And then, my current employer, Michigan State, a big thanks to our coaching staff, who gives me access not only to our players off the ice, but on the ice, and really trust me to do my job. Without them, I think, the access and the time, it isn't what it is, and I'm fortunate to have. And then people around me in my role, an assistant, Natalie Gallimore, and interns. I've got a guy working with me, Andrew Morgan, who've helped me put this together and stay organized and, make sure we're doing things the right way. So, and then 1080 for having me on here and bringing people like all you guys together and really helping to move the needle with not only their technology, but community. So a little bit about my context, what it looks like in college hockey here. So we've got a roster of 26, freshmen as young as 17 years old, graduate students as old as 24, training ages all over the place. Hockey ability is relatively consistent, but time spent in the gym is highly diverse. The development model is completely different than the NHL, than major junior. Out early, you can be done. I think our first year we were done in March. Now hopefully we get the opportunity to play into April, but a lot of time in the off season, May to August. And in my case in particular, we have the team here in July and August. So most of what I'll pull from and things that I'll share is through that 7-8 week stretch I got to spend with our guys. Preseason September, that's where we ramp the ice up. It becomes less about what we're doing in the gym, much more about what we're doing on the ice. And then in season, October to April, 40 games if you're lucky, and well over 100 practices. So again, a completely different model. The 100 practices means 100 lifts, 100 touch points in the gym with me, sometimes more. So a ton of time there, I'm able to get access to our players. And then I also have a group of pros. I think I had 23 we were responsible for this summer, all different leagues across the world. The pro off season based on timelines is a little bit more variable. Needs of the player, age range is much more variable. So, not as much to show there, but I take a similar approach that I do to the team, just spread out across different timelines. I'll try to go through this pretty quick. For those that don't know and aren't familiar with hockey, it's a highly intermittent stop-start style of play. X cells, D cells, very multiplanar due to the nature of the skating stride, the shot, these rotational dynamics, a very high mechanical load, tissue stress, very, very high. This blend of every quality across the force velocity curve with speed, power, strength, and anything in between is kind of brought together with this coordination and athleticism and this rhythmic movement that is skating. Energy systems, again, across the board, anaerobic, aerobic, mobility is of a extreme importance with, again, the positions these guys are required to be in, durability, to be resilient and handle contact and stress, high velocities in those positions. And then lastly, it's highly contextual. And this was something that was a challenge to me when I first started working in hockey is, we train out of context, right? And, I joke with our guys that the soccer team's not coming over and putting skates on and working on speed. So to just assume that everything that we're doing in the gym, whether it be a force plate or a sprint on the 1080 is transferring, may not always be the case. So I think it's challenging that thought process and trying to bridge the gap here between, are we doing things that really matter? And then lastly, in the context of our team, our identity is smart, fast, and hard. So I need to prepare our players to practice, to train, and to play that way, which is incredibly demanding style of hockey. So that's a piece that I need to consider, and things that may not be beneficial towards speed or immediate performance, but from a culture standpoint, I feel and our staff feels are important for our guys to be able to do. So if all those things kind of composite performance, and performance in hockey is, very driven by speed, right? So what does speed look like? You're not on the ice for a ton of time, shift by shift, speed, kind of these key moments in the game are dictated by it. So what does this look like? And I think, initially you have this head down driving, just more of a linear skating model here. A player on the back check, and a key, early, but a key moment in the game to go and save a scoring chance from the other team. And then here, trying to save an icing. And this is a guy that I love. He makes me feel good about myself because he's the strongest guy on the team, the highest jumper on the team, and the fastest sprinter on the team. And he skates like that. So a guy who, you can kind of hang your hat on that what we're doing is making a difference, but by no means the case for everybody. So then there's this other piece, that's more of a dynamic, curvilinear, this exchange of strides, crossovers, and maneuverability up the ice, creating space for others, creating space for yourself. The same player from the first video there, but it's a completely different pattern. It's a completely different movement. It's fast, it's slow, it's, somewhere in between. And again, we get a goal out of it. And then not shown is this idea of change of direction, which I've played around with and is highly complex. It's by no means a 505, hard stop start. It's this looping, using your edges. And I think this just highlights how many different ways there are to accomplish a task in a game. And kind of my mission has been to see how I can try to influence our players' ability to accomplish those tasks. So with that being complex, I think you need to have a thought process, and you need to reduce things to some extent to try to make decisions. And this is what I've used. So if speed is kind of the coveted quality, I think we need to work backwards from there, right? With everything underneath, away from the ice being GPP, being qualities that hopefully support skating. So initially, are you a fast skater? And if not, well, are you a fast sprinter? And if you are a fast sprinter and you're not a fast skater, there's a technical gap. Me making you sprint faster will probably not make you skate faster. From there, then, are you powerful horizontally? Are you powerful vertically? And I think there's a massive a difference between the two. I've got guys who are great on the force plate and can't project or accelerate to save their lives. Beneath that, are you strong? And then beneath that, do you have this low hanging fruit? Are you in shape? Your body comp? Do you have a body composition that supports what you need to be able to do on the ice? And I think this is an interesting point for me. If I'm critical of myself and my evolution as a strength coach, I kind of lived at the bottom here for a little bit. The guys that I trained were in shape, body fats were good, they looked the part, they were strong. And then I kind of realized, well, strong may be fast, but I don't think that necessarily is a differentiator at the highest level. And then you get a force plate, and you look in this, and you live in this realm of vertical power, and you make guys jump, a couple inches higher, and you have all these metrics you get excited about. And, then you realize that may not matter as much as you thought. And then this next layer of horizontal power, you sprint on the 1080, again, you get good at making guys sprint faster. You tell yourself this story that the job's over with. And then you realize that's not the ice. And to actually then go to the level where you're assessing these things on the ice, I think is a must for our sport. And then on the left side here, the other layer of that is, well, if you're fast, goal to blue, can you actually move and maneuver? Are you fast outside of that? And that's another layer that I try to peel back this off season, and I'll highlight and talk about areas where I think I've still got to get better there. So this process is very much a loop, a cycle of an initial assessment, a complex assessment. The system, the athlete, the human that we're working with is by no means simple. So I think a complex assessment is required here to assess a complex system. And then from there, there's an intervention that's targeted, that is specific. You train, you test along the way. You don't just assume adaptation, but you actually engage with that process, adjust, toggle things as you have to. And then you assess again. And I think that's one where I know early on I missed big time. You finish the summer, you take a big sigh, you send guys off to their teams. They may or may not do well in testing. But you tell yourself they're ready. Well, I think it's the humility that we have to have as coaches to look at our own programming and our results, and did that lead to the changes we want? And if so, great. And if not, it's just an opportunity to get better. And then you're back to square one, and you go again. So what does our assessment look like? By no means the topic of this talk, but I think some low hanging fruit and some things that should be addressed early are just basic health screening and anthropometry. So body comp, an optimal range. I'm not as objective, maybe as others with body comp. For me, I think there's equations and formulas and percent and factors of your height. For me, the body comp test is over when you walk in the room and I take a look at you. Do you look the part? Do you look like you had a good summer or a good couple of months away from me? Are you in shape? And we'll be objective. I think 8 to 12 seems to be a healthy range on the in-body, with player preference being accounted for. Mobility, table assessment, nothing, anybody else isn't doing, but just looking at ankle, hip, spine, shoulder. One thing I think this summer that's worth noting, I thought we did a better job being more objective with our hip capacity. So using output sports device, supine 90 degrees, hip IR, hip ER, and marrying those together, looking for a total of 90 degrees. So do you have the capacity to rotate your hip? Different balances between IR and ER, but good range seem to be most important. And then neuromuscularly, looking at isolated actions of the hip, through the adductors, the glutes, hip rotators, shoulder strength. And I think of note here, when I talk to our athletic trainers and I get reports through the season, and especially as we go into preseason, guys are highly sensitive to soft tissue injuries. Guys who show up on that report are guys who are weak in their hips. I think asymmetry, ratios and things are appealing and nice to look at, but for me, pure output and strength seems to be the most important. And same thing with shoulder and armor and dealing with contact in the upper body. So then into our strength assessment, and this is where the 1080 comes into play, and it has been a game changer with us. So looking at a couple uppers and a couple lowers, we use isokinetic testing here heavily. Isokinetic, for those who aren't familiar, it allows you to pull against a predetermined speed limit and really produce force in high amounts. So we'll do this here on the left for a single arm row. This is at 0.4 meters per second. Nothing fancy. A single arm press. That cable in the middle, I stole from Matt. Seems to take some rub and some wear off the body, the shoulder when they do it. But again, it's just exercise. I think when you get a 1080 and you get these functions and things you maybe didn't have access to, it's overwhelming and you get excited a little bit, but it's just training. And these are exercises we would do with other means. The 1080 just allows us to do it at a higher level. So we'll take average concentric force. Peak is easy to, I don't want to say cheat, but maybe inflate with an initial movement. It samples over a small time period. So I don't care for a split second of that. I care to see how they move. So average concentric force seems to be a powerful metric. Isokinetics done through a full range of motion. Knock on wood, it's been incredibly safe for our guys. You can get a force time trace here, which has some implications for a turn to play. I've had a handful of shoulders I've had to do, and we've been able to look back previously and isolate different parts of a movement where they may be weak based on that, and do positional isos or, very, very slow isokinetic partial reps in those ranges and fill some gaps there. So, these tests are more of a baseline for us. Lower body, same idea, this isokinetic function. We'll do it in, I call it a skater push. Our guys seem to get excited about that, but it's just a lateral squat. So again, pushing out against a slower speed. I think people have seen that from other presentations. I'll show a video later. And then we do an isometric squat on the force plate with a harness, 135 degrees at a knee bend, bring a goniometer out, make sure there's some standardization there. And those kind of provide a checks and balances, unilateral frontal plane, bilateral sagittal plane. If I'm asking the question, are you strong enough? And I make decisions on that, I need to be confident that I'm answering that or giving them an opportunity to answer that as best they can. So then some standards here from those 4 tests. And this is with our population. It's our team in 2024, 2025, and then a handful of alumni and pros that we've had come back. That ISO harness squat, that's net peak force. So you start at a level playing field, taking the force exerted by gravity out of it, then these average concentric forces across. I will say with isokinetic, I've heard people use this, as a measuring stick. I think there's a ton of value in it, but it is a little bit of a learned skill. So an initial test may be limited by the understanding of producing force against that speed. So, our guys do a decent job of this because they get to do it a lot. And I think there's something to be noted there for that. But, what we've seen from a percentile, our very best ever, down to some guys towards the bottom and everywhere in between. So now into speed and power. So off ice, we do a 10-yard sprint. Fairly straightforward. We'll take time as an output or an outcome measure, and then these associated force velocity metrics, things that 1080 is able to give us the luxury of having. I will not sprint our guys outside of 10 yards. I just don't care to do it. Not that there's anything wrong with it. I just think if you look at skating, it's an inverse pattern of sprinting. Skating, you start high. As you pick up speed, you get lower joint angles, longer ground contact times, whereas as sprinting is the inverse. So I want to assess acceleration, and 10-yard allows me to do that, and do that without putting them in a position where, they come up in this big anterior pelvic tilt and overreaching and over pushing and things that can get a little bit dicey for hips and things. We jump on a force plate like everybody else. I care less about that from a force velocity standpoint, more from an impulse ratio, looking at discrepancies between propulsive and braking abilities. And I will say, I think force plates are incredibly reliable, provide great data, and we use them heavily. But I think it's reminding ourselves that that's far from the game. I tested a little over 50 guys this summer. Let's call it 50. And no joke, you can't make this up. 49 and 50, the worst 2 guys, or the only 2 guys in the gym making over $5 million. So a little bit maybe of an age gap there, or just not a care or as much into the metrics and things on the force plate. But I think that's something to note. And then on the ice, we'll take the 1080s out there. We'll do a 20-yard. We call it goal to blue. I think it's just shy. The blue is just beyond 20 yards, but goal to blue 20-yard. Again, fairly standard, consistent for us. We'll do this with 2 kg, just enough to take the load out. Same thing with the sprint in the gym. But this is speed on ice at its most reduced form. It's so far from the game, and that's an area where I think I've missed on. And adding this test in the video here is a loop around the bottom of the circle, using your crossovers, and then accelerating is a test that we added this year. And then through there, again, incredibly simple, not much more complexity to it, but just another measure. And I did this. So the way our summer works, I've got the guys for 7 weeks, our first week being when development camps are. So we've got, half our team has been drafted. So I tested half the first week, tested half the second, and we do these tests on the ice. And, the first week goes okay. You don't think much of it. The second week comes and I'm like, man, these guys are better. Our times are way better. And I think it just shows that the NHL values speed. To be invited to those camps and drafted, speed is is an important quality. And then the last piece, when we did this test here, the guy who won the test won the Hobie Baker last year. And the guy who got second was a top 5 draft pick. So from a criterion validity standpoint, how you cross over, how you gain speed from your crossover seems to be really important. So then standards here from similar tests. I think take this with a grain of salt. When you look at these CMJ numbers, this is over a long time with a lot of training. in one individual effort, not an average of three like we'll normally do in a testing session. It pulls their individual best effort and their individual best effort of all time. We have not hit an average of over 20 with our team. While we've gotten close, to get everybody at their best at the same time is tough, but overall, when we pull their data, this is what we've seen. That broad jump, I think, is interesting. I'm not a big broad jump guy. I think the broad jump is a great way to test the broad jump. I don't think it's a great way to test horizontal power. Your projection, your path, your strategy can highly influence how far you go. But I've kind of changed that and tried to flush out more of their speed by putting a mat out and telling them to go far, but not even writing that down. With 10% body weight, we'll hook them to the quantum. I suppose you could do it to sprint too, and have them go as far as fast as they can, and you can get a speed output there. We only did that in 2024. I took that out this year, but I think something maybe worth exploring. Then a 10-yard off ice and a 20-yard on ice. Again, with that 2 kg. So you get all this data, you do all your testing, and then what the heck, you look at it, you have all this information, and you got to organize it. So looking at this down to the individual level, I think it's recognizing that a one size fits all does not work. If you just throw a blanket program at guys, sure, some guys will get better. Some guys I would imagine would be unchanged, and others may even get worse. So looking at this figure here from the left to the right, I've got a guy looking at our testing, fast, right? A good accelerator, powerful on the force plate. But I look at some of our force, our hip testing, our lower body testing, and he's weak. So a guy who getting stronger seems to be of value, may provide a return at making him faster. In the middle here, you've got a guy who already is strong, and he jumps high, and he's got, good strength in his hips, but he's not good at a sprint, and even worse on the ice. So this is a guy who more strength work probably isn't the answer. He needs power, and not just power, but specifically horizontal power, acceleration. And then our guy on the right is great at everything from a speed, a power, an explosion standpoint, but his hips can't move and his groins are weak. So maybe the juice isn't worth the squeeze on more volume and more intensity. It's a microdose approach and more of a mitigation approach, right? Centered around making his hips move better and keeping him healthy so he can be as fast as he is and have the opportunity to be on the ice and show those things. So then quick through here, we use Rock Daisy, awesome platform. Make it as much or as little as you want to be. We've used these percentile reports heavily. Looking at hip rotation, range of motion, groin strength, shoulder strength. And then prior to any bucketing, any performance, testing or intervention, I just want to make sure guys are healthy. I don't think, guys can train with the level of volume that we ask them to train if they're not, and don't function at an isolated level really well, nor with high intensity. So we'll bucket guys, like I said, over 100 practices. That's over 100 off ice warmups. In the 3 lines, do some skips and all that. I don't think you're going to get much change from that. So we try to be more intentional at that time and give guys exercises to do pre and then coming up after the skate exercises to do post, and then more targeted strengthening work and their accessory exercise later into the lift. And then our initial programming process begins with bucketing, like most do. Build your base programs, assign guys accordingly. If I showed you this slide 5 years ago, there would have been 6 buckets with arrows to other buckets, and it just doesn't work. I think to be able to be effective, it's got to be executed at a high level. You have to be able to coach it. So if guys don't know what they're doing, that's not going to happen. So I've dumbed things down a bit for myself and for our athletes. There's a force emphasis group and a group who's pretty good from a force producing standpoint and can spend more time on the velocity side of things. And then there's an additional hypertrophy component to this that may be applied to either one, not a pure hypertrophy bucket, but can you benefit from some more muscle mass? And then a completely separate conversation, but a 4th bucket, I would call our goalie bucket. Different exercise selection, different loading patterns, intensity over volume. But again, that's for another conversation. So everything from here on out is going to apply purely to our skaters. And then within that, it becomes more complex. So you have your initial base program. If you were an outsider coming into our gym, it would look like there are 2 lifts going on. Within that, then there's differences between force and velocity from an acceleration standpoint, braking and propulsive needs from a vertical power standpoint, loading patterns, exercise selection, injury history, all things then that will cause, more visible or subtle differences between athletes from program to program. So then, kind of going through then what we do from here with body comp, again, low hanging fruit, more based on player preference and feedback, but this will determine things from a metabolic standpoint. Do you need more volume from a fat loss? Fat don't fly. You can make somebody jump higher, sprint faster, skate faster by taking some weight off of them if it's counterproductive. And then, weight gain, can you deal with the impact, the armor, the contacts? Just as a high side of this body fat may be counterproductive, a low side may be counterproductive as well. So then looking at our strength testing and where we take this. So I'm trying to ask the question, how strong are you? And I don't care for, you have to be this number or that number. I just want to see how much are you going to benefit from more strength work? What's the return on investment here? If I'm going to push you at a certain intensity, is it worth what I'm putting into it, right? And our guys at the top here are strong. Maybe it's a microdose approach. Our guys at the bottom, maybe are weak. It's much more volume with that intensity, and then guys in the middle, it's maybe a healthy blend of both. And the way I describe this is that everybody gets everything. Some guys just get different amounts, right? There's a need for intensity, but with residual training effects and things, maybe there's not as need for much frequency with that intensity. So then getting into speed profiling, again, this is where we'll pull from 1080 heavily. And I want to look back at what I did in 2024, which is probably going to be a better presentation than what I have for you this year, just from a standpoint of systems and thought process. So, and again, give some rationale for maybe why I didn't do it exactly this way this year. But we look at our force velocity profile. Again, we live in that 10-yard space off the ice. We get these associated metrics that with 1080 become difficult or beyond my means to get. Power, an RF max and an F naught, things more indicative of force producing abilities and acceleration. DRF and V naught more indicative of speeds and getting to higher velocities. So we'll take those metrics, put those in your back pocket for when we profile guys, and then we'll do a load velocity profile. A 3 kg run, a 10 kg run, a 17 and a 24 seems to be enough space between to get some meaningful data to have a nice regression and model for different loads that are going to do different things to your top speed. And you can be creative with this. I think now it would require you to go much beyond 10 yards, but I just refuse to do it. So I've pulled the theoretical velocity max, or even just taking that one off. And the guys at 1080 have helped me do it in a way that I feel is best for our population. We'll do a 10 kg, a 17 and a 24. And if you look at the force time trace, they're not getting really much, if any, speed gain beyond those distances. So I can keep them there with some load, keep them in those more, hockey, if you will, positions and get a good model there to get some feedback on then percent decks, which are going to give you, specific zones and adaptations we may target. So then based on that, our force velocity profile, guys who are force deficient, who are better on the velocity side of things, and guys who are bad at both, right? Low hanging fruit. There's probably more to be had from training the force end of the spectrum if you don't have it. We did 4 weeks of training at a 50% deck, 2 weeks of training at a 25% deck. Guys who are on the other side of things, a velocity deficient group, and guys who are good in both, maybe don't need the intensity or the stress from these force qualities. Did 2 weeks at a 50% deck, 4 at a 25. And then guys who are somewhere in the middle on both did 3 and 3. And again, like I said earlier, everybody gets everything, just different amounts of it. So then on the ice, same thing, force velocity profile. There's some debate, maybe the confidence in those metrics on the ice with the stride and the surface being different. But, I figured why not? At least there'd be some value in taking a look at there. And then I kind of went all in 2 summers ago on this. I bucketed guys who were force deficient and they did loaded sprints. Not particularly heavy, 8 kgs. I've done 9, I've done 10. 8 seems to be enough to get a result. Guys didn't quite complain about some of the soreness and things that I had from 10. A couple of reps, unload for a couple of reps helps the workflow, managing the 1080s. some intent, some potentiation going between the two. And then our velocity deficient group and guys who are good in both areas did overspeed with 3 kilos getting pulled into the machine for 10 yards, which seemed to give, about a 5 to 10%, depending on the guy, improvement in velocity. Again, 3 to 4 reps contrasted. So what these look like here then in action: loaded sprints. That variable resistance is incredible, from an ease of transition to load. So we'll do 3 to 8 kilos at 5 meters per second. Just allows them to kind of get going before that load tacks on. And then assisted, going towards the machine. And I gave them feedback here. The big number on the machine, the number that I shouted out, was miles per hour. Again, the goal was speed. So let's go fast. So then what happened? We made these interventions, trained accordingly, and off the ice, guys seem to get a good result. Plus 3.2%. It should be minus, but 3.2% faster, improved. Off the ice, on the ice, most everybody, not quite everybody, got better. Sprints improved, power improved. These force producing qualities seem to improve, and the velocity qualities seem to decline a little bit, which was interesting. So then on the ice specifically, this group who we made a more force focused intervention versus the group we made a more velocity focused intervention, the group who we addressed force with got better, and got better by more, and specifically with these force producing qualities with a greater decrement in these velocity qualities. And the velocity group had similar trends, which was interesting. The force qualities got better, velocity got worse, but not quite as much so. It didn't quite get the same results, which was interesting. So I kind of asked, well, then why did I do these two groups? Why didn't I just have everybody do load? And then digging a little bit deeper, if time is the task, right? Speed is not necessarily a instantaneous miles per hour or peak velocity. For me, speed is getting something done quicker, right? Is are you powerful? Can you accomplish this task faster? Which in this case was, a 10-yard sprint or here a goal to blue. So what was correlated? What metrics as a means to change these times seem to have the biggest influence? So on ice time and off ice time seem to be heavily correlated with again these early acceleration force producing capabilities of RF max and F naught, with power, and then not much so with velocity. So if velocity is not as important, why did I go so heavily into profiling, into separating guys, and really just training velocity with one group? It was an area I was critical of myself. And this gives a good macro. So this is kind of how things went for us the first half of the season last year. So the far left data point is going to be start of summer, and the far right is going to be the end of the first half of our season. In college, we play a first half, we get a winter break. Some guys go to World Juniors, we come back, we get a second half, which the travel schedule in the second half, games more condensed, travel schedule a little bit more chaotic, led to not maybe being able to have the consistency of intake that we did in the first half. But I think interesting here to see how these things change with training. So heavier sprints in summer, higher percent decks. If you look at the bottom right, these force producing qualities got better, and velocity, right, the inverse, which makes sense. It's imposed, it's the SAID principle, specific adaptations to imposed demands. When we unloaded, velocity improved, force got worse. 25% deck then seemed to give a similar result to what we got in the summer, which was of note, something to put in my back pocket that, maybe some more moderate loads there's a place for. And then when we unloaded, again, force down, velocity up, right? Which should be no surprise. But if you look at our times, both off and on the ice, and where these peaks and valleys fall, a period of heavier sprinting seems to make them tired, fatigued, slow them down in a sense. And then right around that time of unload, shortly after, a week or two, and there's some research that backs this, is when things seem to peak. So from peaking and tapering and things, there may be some implication there. And by no means linear, right? I think that's one thing to keep an eye on and track. And a regression doesn't always mean a negative. It just means there might be a greater progression to come. So an interesting look for the year. And influenced some things for me going into this year. So profiling now to this summer, I think the big things that are non-negotiables for me are that we have to do speed training in context. It has to be done on the ice for transfers to take place, and it has to be done with intent. I've got a group of late teenagers and early 20-year-olds who are highly competitive, and that's something I think that we can lean into and use to get better results. So leaderboards, feedback, every guy knowing what their best sprint time is are very, very important for us. And then if I'm trying to change acceleration, force seems to be the means to do that, right? Not necessarily in the gym, but from how we load guys with our speed work. So off the ice, I still wanted to, without going through an entire force velocity profile, having to sprint a distance that would give me good data, without taking the time to do a load velocity profile. Our guys get to me in July, and I do my best to talk to their trainers and make sure they're prepared, but I don't know exactly what they've been doing. So coming in and sprinting with 24 kilos the first week, or taking the time to prepare them to do that may not be the best approach. So I wanted to still respect the guys are different and how they accelerate is different. So we looked at first step forces, first step speeds, those are in miles per hour, and then power, and then bucketed guys based on that for some things in our training. And then we did loaded sprints with 15% body weight, definitely a reduced approach from what I took the year before, but that 25% deck seemed to give a good result in season. 15% body weight loads seemed to pair up within the realm of 25% deck, 12, 13 kgs, heavy enough, but not too heavy, right? Is kind of where I try to make sense of things. Then on the ice, we did it the same way, but we loaded everybody. We lived in that 8-kilo range, and we had guys on the unloaded ones race, which produced a ton of intent to get some really high quality work done there. And then we added a piece that we didn't the year before to address more of this curvilinear crossover driven speed that I think is as, if not more important than just going from A to B. So then off a bit here, but just looking at what this looks like when we do on ice load. So the top here given on the back end dashboard from 1080. So this black line is with an 8 kg sprint. You can see the variable resistance kind of kick on. Those wattages get higher, and then the bottom is with a 2 kg essentially and unloaded. So peak power is not drastically different, but average powers 3 and some change higher. So much more high exposure to these higher power strides. And I like the visual too. If you go 10 yards with the variable resistance, they're not getting a ton, a couple strides. If you go 20, they're getting 10, 12, maybe 10 really high power strides. If you think about this from power training, that's 5 reps a leg. If we were in the gym doing a trap bar or whatever it may be for power, that's about the rep range we would live in. So seems to be the right dose. And then at the bottom from our load management system, we use not Catapult, but similar. It's Achieve Sport Performance Technologies, which gives us, similar to Catapult, bands based on acceleration. So I try to move over the course of the summer. This is week 1 to week 7, and then week 8 would be preseason, where we're getting on the ice with coaches and attacking each other for an hour every day or however long we're allowed to practice. So I need to move the needle and get guys from a mechanical standpoint prepared to do that. And in the blue here was our skates in the summer, and in the green was our skills or were our speed sessions. So at times 20, at least 15% more load, more high intensity skating, just by adding in these speed sessions. And I think we've prepared our guys better than we have in the past by doing this with more frequency and more intent for some of the forces and stresses they're going to have to deal with on the ice. So then what do we do? How do we train? Once we collect all this information, we bucket guys, we kind of, figure out where we want to work. What is the system? What is the structure to do this? And this is heavily influenced by quad current, that I've taken from Ben and inspired by his work. I think it just is manipulating contraction type, spending time on the force velocity curve, centered around different things you need to work on, and making sure each day sequences with the next. So an intensification, a higher intensity, more strength driven phase, coming off the weekend, maybe a little sluggish, maybe not in the best position, from a nutrition, a sleep standpoint to have high mechanical load or stress. So this is a great day for isometrics. In this phase, it's driven around intensity, using overcoming isometronic, and we'll make this more of a lateral day. Day 2 then is eccentric. You could do accentuated or use a 1080 for some maximal, super maximal things, but we've leaned on the flywheel for this. In a day where with the flywheel, we'll put them in positions that are more like a crossover, more trying to stress that inside leg. 2 days in a row, pretty fried. Third day, we'll shut her down. Day 4, more dynamic, acceleration, speed, strength, qualities. We'll add in an on-ice session this day. Our acceleration block initially after a good warm-up is going to be centered around hip extension, projection, and spinal engine. And in this stage, loading submaximally, but getting some movement and some integration there and some capacities that hopefully are going to support our sprinting and our skating. And we'll bucket guys based on their first step differences, with a force deficient group doing heavier, higher impulse, more forceful movements. Our verbiage to those guys is drive and push. And then a velocity deficient group with lighter med ball throws, less about that 1 to 3 step range, more bounding, light assisted things. And they may be cued to bounce and go fast and things of that nature that are a little bit lighter, less forceful. We'll time sprints, we'll load sprints. We time them first so we don't get any potentiations, a little bit more standard, load, and then lift from there. Day 5, depending on the guy, hypertrophy work, maybe strength work, maybe power work, primarily concentric at the end of the week with some different methods and implements there. And then day 6, optional, but we got a culture, a group of guys who want to do more. So I'll open it up on Saturdays, low mechanical load, low neural stress, but get some work done that can top up after the week. So the second phase, and for our pros, this would be phase 4, right? GPP, accumulation, intensification, and now our final or our transfer phase. But in the window with the guys I have in the summer, it's our second phase of that 7-week stretch. And this phase is much more specific. We're going into preseason where that load on the ice is high. So these type of exercises, this type of training, a little bit of an increased on ice volume is going to help transition them to that. Whereas that in season, it becomes more general. So in this transfer phase, day 1, get them moving, wake them up. Day 2 is a curvilinear day now. So we'll do different complexes, focusing on a crossover pattern, an inside leg. We'll take isokinetic now with the upper body. I really, really like isokinetic training in this phase. In the past, I'd put it 1 phase earlier. I like it here. It's a little less force than an overcoming iso, but it's full range of motion. Again, very, very safe, low eccentric load, and a great potentiating factor. And then we'll add an on ice curvilinear day for that day 2, where we'll do some things which this year we were limited. We had an on ice session pulled. We only actually got 2 of those days on the ice, which, it is what it is. Day 3, same. Day 4, similar, but we'll progress that acceleration block. Time, load sprints, potentially where guys may fall on that spectrum, start to unload a little bit. And then we'll do a lateral complex with some isokinetic movements, flywheel plyo, transference is moving strength and force to velocity. And these complexes seem to be good ways to do that. Day 5 will progress. If you're doing hypertrophy, now you're doing strength. If you're doing strength, now you're doing power. And then day 6 starts to say the same. So in this phase, or in general, wanting to work across the force velocity curve, again, the 1080, you can do it all in one piece of equipment. An absolute game changer here for us. So this is that skater push, that lateral squat, working here against 0.3 meters per second. And as important as the exercise is the feedback, is the intent that it drives. So feedback here, again, is based on strength, is based on force. Here, a lateral bound, feedback, speed, good intent, good compete. You can cut the eccentric speed down where they're not getting pulled back at the end on that landing. And again, even in between, you could work power and maybe they don't jump, but they push and step. And your feedback there could be more driven by wattage and things in the middle of that curve. Same idea here with the crossover pattern. Light here, 6, 8, 10 is as heavy as we've gone. short 5 yards, that inside leg, curvilinear, with the loose clamp on the belt, can slide a bit. Again, light 3, 4, 5, 6 is as heavy as we've gone, and feedback here on time. Again, I think that's my favorite part of this tech and these machines is everything you do gets a score. If you give them a score, they're going to try harder. On the ice here, and we did some things with the flywheel, rhythm, timing, loading, unloading. I think there's just kind of scratched the surface, but a ton to be had there. Beyond the goal to blue, we did some different starts, variable resistance, let them kind of get on that inside leg safely, but add load as they pick up speed. So then we did all that, and what happened? From a health standpoint, again, an area I was really happy with. I hadn't looked at, the way that I looked at better than I had before. Hip rotation, range of motion, groin strength in general, that isokinetic measure improved a ton. Again, a little bit maybe of I wouldn't say a false measure, but it can be inflated, that improvement, just by guys practicing the test, but matched with our testing on the force plate, which is pretty mindless, right? So some improvements there that we could really hang our hat on. Off ice, 3.7% faster. I've been training a lot of these guys for a long time. We sprint a lot. I get excited about 3%. And then almost everybody got better. Our jump height, not something I put as much stock into. We got some guys who are high jumpers. I don't think that needs to be the sole focus. A little bit more fatigue dependent. I'm not peaking them at the end of summer to feel good about myself and the results that we got. We push and work so they're prepared. I want them to leave tired, not fresh. So jump heights are a little bit more all over the place, but 16 guys who jumped over 20, which is something to be excited about. But on ice speed, goal to blue, 7% faster, with everybody getting better. Every guy, right? And I think that's why you don't guess, right? It needs to be individual. It needs to be targeted. So really, really happy with that. And then something I wouldn't say scratch my head about, but in a way maybe I was excited about, is that crossover didn't change. So there's more work to be done there. It turns out that 2 sessions doing a couple of crossovers on the ice isn't going to make you faster. No surprise there. But I was interested. We did damn near everything you could do off the ice. We made these guys stronger. We made them more powerful. We made them sprint faster. We made them skate faster. And that still didn't change. So I think it highlights that requires a level of specificity and to be addressed in your training, that pattern is different. So if you look at how we compare guys, and this is a 10 to 20 split from the goal to the blue. So the second half of that. So flying into that, burst guys on, or the data set on the right from the crossover. And it tells you what you should already know. Your fast guys are fast, your slow guys are slow, but there is a difference there. And there are some guys, our best guy, on the straight line was not our best guy on the crossover, and vice versa. And some guys even showed some significant discrepancies there. So what do you do with this? And to be honest, I don't know yet. Do you train their deficit because that's where you can maybe get the biggest return? Do you train their strength because that's their bias towards skating? Or is it a balance? And I believe in my studying, it is a balance. But I think it's worth noting, it's interesting. And what do you really have to do to change that then if all this other stuff didn't? So, looking beyond this summer and into years to come, I still think, let's not get lost in the weeds here. I do think our job is forever going to be these foundational capacities. Are guys in shape? Are guys strong? Are they resistant to injury? Are they explosive? I meet with our coaches at the end of every year and often throughout the year to kind of break down our roster. And every guy, one guy needs his first steps got to be better. One guy is he's got to be more explosive. One guy is his first 3 steps have to be better. However, whatever verbiage you use, everybody has to get faster. So I do think that if we can train and develop capacities that support speed, we're doing our job and we can hang our hat on that. But the next level of this is there's a level of specificity and complexity that I think has to be had once those lower hanging fruit are accomplished. And for me, I think I missed on hitting the inside leg with higher force, isokinetic movements, loading that a little bit more. And then more variability with their speed training on the ice. I think next year we'll attach that session, that crossover curvilinear movement, with our acceleration sessions, just do 2 groups each session and flip, so they get exposure to both instead of trying to force a second session in the week, later on when you may only get a couple of touches with it. So that's kind of my direction, my thought. Again, really just my path on the year and my approach and where my approach has gotten me. But again, just want to thank everybody for getting on. I love talking about this stuff. So if you want to reach out or give me feedback or something you think I missed on or can do better, I'd love to hear it. I'm not a big Instagram guy, but that's my Instagram. Get back at a DM, within a week or so, whenever I check it, and then email there is probably the best way. So I don't know if we got time now for questions or what the deal is, but thanks for getting on here, guys. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Will. That was awesome, man. We do have a couple minutes to do some questions, and we had some come in through the chat, which is awesome. I wanted to kick it off with this. Uh, since you're in that development, hey, between high school, juniors to the pros, what you're seeing a lot of athletes come in your building like that you're having to evaluate. What are some of the things that the hockey athletes that you're seeing are maybe missing coming into your program? Is it truly strength? Is it mobility? I mean, if speed is king here, what are the things that you're seeing? And if I'm assuming that is true, you're going to see some things. What would you like some of those coaches to work on if they can before they get to you?
Yeah, I think it's just I mean it's a little bit of everything. It really depends on the guy. Every year we've gotten a little better, a little more talented, a little more high end. And we've actually, I would say, gotten worse in the gym. Those better players aren't
Yeah.
the best ones in the gym. And I think the thing I see the most is just movement and coordination off the ice. These guys who are really elite, high end skill are not the strongest. Often not the fastest, and definitely not always the best movers off the ice. I think it's a blend of those things, right? So I would say just overall robustness and training, and the best way to develop that is have them come in with a higher training age. And we're getting so much better at that. These junior teams now have strength coaches and people who are doing a great job, and it made my life way easier. But I think if we can just get these kids, on a program in season early, and then when they get here, it won't be as much of a shock to them how much we're training, and they've got a base to work off of.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Another question I had, you were showing the lateral jump because you're obviously doing ice kinetic testing with that lateral skater on the synchro, and then you're doing the lateral jump. Are you doing a specific amount of load when you're doing the lateral jump? Are you doing any low velocity testing with it, or what is your thought process on prescribing load for those jumps?
We've tested, similar to the broad jump. We've done 10% body weight, tested that. I think it's a good test. We test a lot. I don't really have room for many more, but if I did, I'd probably add that one. When we train it, we're in that, depending on the athlete, 5 to 10 kilos range, I would say.
Nice. Okay. And are you looking at peak? You're looking at like peak power on those jumps to traditionally, and that's what you're shouting out to the.
Yeah, we would assess power. We'll give them feedback on power, velocity, just to give some intent.
Oh, nice. Okay. Very good. Well, here's another one. I told you that we should have called it goal to blue line, though. I was right. You nailed it. Like you brought that home, so I love it. Um, how often, just catching up kind of during the talk, but how often are you doing the assisted skating on ice? When the guys that are appropriate for that, is that once or twice a week? Is that kind of what kind of block or periodization do you use it?
Did that once a week in the off season last year. I think there would be value in doing loaded sprints for a certain period of time, and then maybe finishing the summer with assisted. Again, it kind of to match the training in the gym from higher forces to faster speeds. I think that would be really cool, but I haven't done that.
Nice. Another question that came in, you mentioned bucketing and that you've really simplified your bucketing, where in the past you may have had a lot of buckets and a lot of decision trees, and it's all about execution. So the question is, with the change in how you're approaching things, are you also on bucketing? Are you also seeing a decrease in injuries? Are you seeing a change in how injuries are being presented, specifically the soft tissue injuries? Uh, what are your thoughts about what you've changed? Is that improving player health?
Yeah, no, I think bucketing prior to the force and velocity stuff, and making sure that guys have targeted, corrective, if you will, exercise and activation routines. I think that's given really good results. Subjectively, guys seem to be healthier. I think one of the best ways to keep guys healthy is to just train really hard. So keeping intensity, even guys who are strong, still dosing intensity, but dosing it the right way, seems to make guys more durable.
Nice. Okay. Hey, I think that's all the questions we had come in. And you gave me a lot to think about as always, so I really appreciate it today and what you shared. And yes, people, please reach out. Will is willing to talk to you and share ideas. I really appreciate that about him and taking the time today to do this. So, Will, next time I see you, I will thank you in person, but thank you for joining again. And everyone that joined on the call, thank you for joining.